So I guess I'll sort of kick off here. So my name is Danielle Tavares-Wixon. I'm the project facilitator for AU Core, and we're at our third document reference information session because this is a really important resource that we're working on for AU Core. And if you could just bop to the next slide, Heath. One of the things that I just wanted to remind everybody of, for those of you who have been to one before, or if this is your first one, this is an informal discussion. The whole point is that we get to actually go down rabbit holes or have conversations around how does a resource work? What do we care about? So you can put your hand up at any time and ask a question, whether you think it's silly or not. Let's do that. The voting is not in this session. We're going to be doing some voting in the next meeting. So that's actually next Thursday. That the first kind of look of what should the profile be like in AU Core be voted on, and it's going to come out of these calls that we've had. And I know we're sort of building on things, but don't kind of, if this is your first one and you weren't at the previous two, don't assume that you can't put your hand up and ask a basic question. Please do. That's the whole point of these information sessions is that we get to share information. So I'll hand over to you now, Heath.
Thanks, Danielle. So yeah, Heath Cool. So I'm one of the five facilitators for Sparked, and here to walk you through some of the information about the document reference, which is being proposed as a AU Core profile for in R3. As a couple of other dot points here, as Danielle said, we are moving towards a proposal, and the intent at this stage is that part, at least, of this proposal will be presented at next week's AU Core Working Group call on Thursday. A couple of links here if you haven't done already. There is basically a info session page for this resource that is collecting all of the previous videos and slides that have been presented thus far, along with what the proposal kind of looks like at this stage that I'm walking through for this profile. And there is also a separate vendor support page for document reference where we're trying to gather information about how you're actually using the document reference in your implementations at the moment and which elements that you're using, what codes you're using, and what reference types that you're using, etc. So I'll just quickly jump off to those pages. Hopefully, a browser will pop up at some stage. It will. So it just looks like there's three parts of this vendor support page that I'm hoping that people will contribute to. Please add a line down the bottom of this particular table. So you need to edit the page. If you haven't got a login for the HL7 Confluence, you can do so. I don't have a reference to work out how to do that, but you can certainly put something in Zilip or on this chat, and I'm sure someone will help you point you in the right direction around that. So the first part is trying to get an idea of what elements you're implementing. The second one is looking at what codes you're implementing for various elements such as status and category, etc. And then the last one are what types you're implementing. So things like subject and author, there's various choices there. So we're looking to see which ones you implement. On the info session page, um, basically, I'll just scroll back up the middle. As I said, there's the previous meetings that we've done. This is the proposal of my support elements that we're putting forward. And then we've got a comparison against other IGs that are out there as well, so you can see how they compare, which are also included in some of the slides I'm about to present. To kick us off, I would like to start a bit of a Minty, which is what we do in these sessions, just to get a feel for who you are. But at the same time, it is a um, a get you logged in and ready to go because I would hopefully get to a point in this in the discussion today where I'll ask some questions along the way to get your feedback that perhaps you haven't been had a chance to do so verbally. So again, encouraging verbal responses and feedback and discussion. But if you're that way inclined and want to wait until the Minty and provide some feedback that way, there will be an opportunity if we get far enough, which I'm hoping that we will today. So we're just asking, have you attended an information session in the past? Whether you've actually attended one of these previous two info sessions or whether this one's a new one. It just gives a bit of an idea on how much we need to go back over some of the information. So it's good to see another couple of people attending. Um, and of course, having those that are coming back. I'm seeing a lot more people on the call than 10, so I will hold here for a little bit longer while people get a chance to get onto the Menti.
Yep, love it. Let's make everybody have a go. I mean, if the QR code doesn't work, people can go to menti.com um, and they can use the code. I'll just put that in the chat. So you can go to menti.com and use the code. What is it? It's an
Eight eight one eight four one
8184
three six two.
1362. Okay, I'll put that in the chat for people.
Excellent. We're getting a few now. Okay, you can keep joining if you're still in the process. I'll move on to the next one. So does your system implement the document reference resource? So, yes, you currently do it. No, you don't have it, but intend to, or you don't have any intention. Otherwise, you're not an implementer. So even if you're not an implementer, please choose that option just so that we know how many people have actually um, responded. So not implementers aside, we've got a 50-50 going on. Okay, the intentions are starting to jump out in front. So we've got 12 out of 14, so I might move forward on that one. Again, if you want to join, you're welcome to at any stage. Okay, that's it for now. So I'll just go back a step in case you're still jumping on. Okay. So as we say, third session on this, and we've had some amazing conversations so far. So the first week we basically got through basically defining some scope and usage of this profile in AU Core, and we barely got into any of our must support elements, but then started again last week with must support elements, and we got through a couple. So I'll give a quick overview of where I think that we got to, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper on some more must support elements. Hopefully, we'll get to some obligations, and I suspect that we're going to. If we get to value sets, we won't get very far. So hopefully we can have some discussion around type if there's plain sailing. So what's the scope at the moment that we've agreed on? So this is it's the profile for providing minimum set of expectations for indexing, storing, discovering, and accessing various formatted digital health documents for a subject of care within an Australian context. So highlighted there a couple of things. We are talking about documents and the indexing of them, storing them, discovering them, and accessing. But in specifically for a subject of care. So it's about a patient, um, and other documents that we want to do for other purposes. They might be about, between practitioners or between about groups of people, etc. That's not what we're trying to do here. We have nailed that down over the last couple of weeks that we are focusing on a subject of care. Um, so this is enabling that that a document exists potentially, and then being able to get access to that through a URL, or whether it's stored within the actual resource itself. So depending on implementations that around that. So this is the profile that I'm going to walk through as the proposed document and as the proposed profile, sorry. And the way I've been doing that is sort of in a process of comparing it to other IGs. So the other IGs that I'm comparing against are international IGs. And later on, I'll also compare it against what we've been discussing in previous information sessions around AU core composition and how that relates to patient summaries, etc. So the IPA document reference, so there's the International Patient Access. That is an API, REST API profile on how can people or apps get access to a individual patient's clinical records. And in this particular case, the document reference is getting access to their any documents associated with a particular patient. Similarly, there is a US core document reference profile, and you can see there's a few different constraints around US core. And the one on the end is one that's been around for quite some time under a profile that's not run by HL7, but based on HL7 FAR. IHE is sort of I guess, a sister standards organization, very much focused on implementation and looking at mobile health documents, healthcare documents there. I think the H stands for that off the top of my head. But that's got a number of document reference profiles. The one I've been comparing is a minimal one because that's what we're looking at is minimal expectations. So we've talked about type and we've talked about category. Um, I've skipped over identifier and status because they're fairly non-contention. But type and category we've had a very long discussion about, and also subject we finished up on last time. And I think we've got to the point, in my opinion, and correct me if my opinion is not reflecting your opinion of where we sat, but we feel that the type is a mandatory, must support element, whilst the category is also must support, but it is optional. So in that particular case, if you've got one, you should provide one, but if you don't, that's okay. Whereas at least you need to provide a type. And the principle of that is there's no point in having a document reference to something that you don't know what it actually is. Similarly, as I've talked about from the scope perspective, we're talking about subjects. We're talking about patients. So again, we're making this a mandatory element, must support, and we're not necessarily getting down to the types at the moment, but it's likely that it will be an AU core patient because that's just our principles of AU core profiles. Any rebuttals or comments on that feedback overview from previous sessions? No, so I'll move forward then. So the next set of elements that I would like to do is actually about the content, now where the rubber meets the road now, where we're actually going to put the document, or at least reference the document. And so what I'm proposing here, or the 1 to 0, 1 to many on the left, that's the actual FHIR resource definition. So it is a mandatory element to have content. again, what's the point of the document reference if there's no document? And so what we're looking to do is basically say that's must support. And that might seem obvious because it's mandatory, but there are some elements, nuances around um, obligations and things that we'll jump into later on. But basically, we're marking it as must support, and then there's certain obligations that we'll have associated with that. The next one, next level down as a sub element of that is attachment. So attachment is also mandatory, and it is one to one. No, that's not quite right. I think I've misrepresented that one. I think it's one to many. Can someone just confirm that for me?
Yeah, I'll have
Oh,
a quick look, but I think you might actually be right. Okay, I'll have a look right now.
no, I'll jump in here and go there. So content attachment, no, attachment is one to one. So it's the parent that is one to many.
Mm,
So that's where I got it right. So yeah, one to many up here, but if you've got, you can have many content elements,
mm.
but within that content backbone, there is a mandatory and one only attachment within that content, and that makes much more sense. So what was throwing me was over the here, over that it's only one to one. What I've represented there is the fact that they haven't marked it as must support because they have this different principle around marking things as must support in IHE. They don't mark mandatory things because they're mandatory. Um, Whereas the other three profiles are marking it as must support as well. So it's mandatory and must support. The sub elements on that, we've got content type and data, URL, and creation. So I'll start with content type. So this is basically allows you to provide a MIME
Can
type.
we just, sorry, before you go into that, because I think that's important, is to note that attachment is element. Everything after that is part of a data type. And so that's a little bit different, I think, than some of the other things that we've shown. And so
So
I just wanted to have that clarification for people that the underneath the content backbone, you've got two elements. And now what we're also presenting is like an inline set of must supports around what are we supporting in an attachment data type.
yeah, so you can see here in the base definition of document reference, we've got the attachment element, which is of type attachment. And as we navigate through to that, this is the full set of elements associated with that data type. So there's content type, language, data, URL, size, hash, title, creation. They're all optional. And as you can see, the way that content type is defined here, it's a MIME type. So things like application slash PDF or um, image, JPEG, or those sorts of things, text, plain text, um, etc. So all of those types of MIME types are the code that we use for that particular one. The other ones we're talking about whilst we're here, that's on my list, and you'll notice I've narrowed it down. So, but that's because I'm kind of suggesting these are the must support ones. So just keep in mind there are other ones there, and if you think that these other things are important, then please let us know. But data is actually where we put an inline representation of the document. So it's base 64 encoded as text. I'll come to you in a sec, Chris. Um, and then the alternative to inline data is the URL, where we actually have a reference, URL reference to the actual document. So that would be an absolute URL usually, so that you can then download that document. And that's where things like size is useful because it's useful to know that the thing that we're pointing to at the that particular URL, 150 megabytes versus perhaps 5 kilobytes. And then the fourth one I've put together here is creation. So it's the date the attachment was first created. So just a bit of background there. So Chris, you're on mute at the moment. If you wanted to just excuse me while I cough.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So sorry. Look, this is my first meeting, so I'm still trying to get my head around it. So could you give me an example of so would an example be like an attachment is endoscopy report with attachments? Is that sort of what we're talking about here?
Exactly. Yeah. So it is,
So,
but it's a endoscopy report that is a PDF
yep. I
or
suppose I
or
would
a
just be
Word document, or it could be something that's FIRE. There's the concept of FIRE documents, if you're not
yep.
aware of that, which is a structured document that's
Hmm.
JSON payload, so we can point to those as well, and which is why, as Danielle said in the intro, this is a very important profile that we're kind of pairing it up alongside what we've done over the last few weeks with the AU core composition profile.
Okay, totally get that. I suppose my comment then is I would just be a little hesitant around the one-to-one attachment in that you may get an operative report, but you'll then potentially get multiple attachments.
And
If
and
it's limit if it's
as
limited
we
to one, yeah.
yeah, so at the level above, you can have multiple content, but within that, you've got one attachment. So yes, you can carry at the base level, you can carry multiple documents within this one document reference resource. But one,
Okay.
all right, so the repeating part is at this content element level, but for
So that's
each
at the main
content,
document level.
yeah.
So you've got a specialist report that's got an endoscopy report in it, as well as some imaging reports, things like that, as attachments. That's not going to meet this requirement, then, is it? Because it's the one main document and one attachment.
No, no, no. So there's the document reference,
Yeah.
which is the resource. Then you've
Yeah.
got, and within that, there is a content element which can
Right.
repeat. So,
Gotcha.
so you
Yep.
can have that content element for, say, your PDF being the report, and then the attachment for that report is the attachment element where we're saying it is a PDF, and here is the data or the link to it, and it was
Hmm.
created at this particular date. And we'll get to format, but basically we're saying that this is um, it it's just I don't know whether there's a template that you're basing that report on. Um, that's more based around things like structured documents such as CDA or FIRE document, but you can also say potentially say something about the format, whether it's a Word document or I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, but then you would have a second iteration of the content element, which you can then attach a JPEG or a could be a DICOM image or a link to a
Hmm.
DICOM image, those sorts of things, and just keep repeating. So there might be 20 images along with a particular main report,
Gotcha. Thank
but it is um, critical if you look at my little annotations here that at the moment I am suggesting that we leave that open to allow multiple documents, whereas one of these profiles over on the right did actually restrict it back to only one. Right. So to actually support your scenario, Chris, I am recommending that we leave it as multiples.
you. Yep. I support that.
Um, okay, so back to content type. The content type, as I said before, is optional at the base level, at the file level. IPA is suggesting that it is mandatory. The IHE profile is suggesting it's mandatory, but US Core is saying it's optional. I'm proposing that it's mandatory. So, any thoughts, any reasons why we shouldn't make content type mandatory?
No, I think it should be mandatory. I mean, if we're bothering to share something, let's share something, is my thought.
Yeah.
Is the content type, is it dependent on a group of codes? That, like it's not a fixed set of codes. We know what content types will be. Is it
Well,
like
at the moment,
a
it's not
list?
restricted. It is a MIME type. That's all we're saying at the moment. It is one of the
Okay.
possible MIME types, which, as you would know, Brendan, is very, very broad, and
Yeah.
it's kind of more of a syntax than it is a definitive set of codes. And it's
Yeah.
not something that we necessarily manage, but I mean, we could
That,
certainly come up with um, a, an additional binding, like as a candidate set, potentially. But do we want to go down that route in this first release of having the document reference resource
no,
profiled?
no. I was just asking whether it needs to
Yeah,
be closed or open. And I think if it's open, then it allows us to support more document types.
yeah, Danielle.
So I the only reason I can possibly think of why that would be valuable in an ecosystem of not mandating content, meaning if this is just the way you get it, and it could be anything, could be PDF, could be Word document, could be Fire, could be CDA, could be V2, it could be anything, that has an agreed MIME type. Um, and it doesn't have to be in line. I mean, obviously it could be the data, but it just could be the link on how do you go find it. So the only possible thing that I've been thinking about for what could be valuable, and I'm not actually convinced it is to use this as advertising for subscriptions. Like subscribing to a service where you just know something exists, but you don't actually have a way to get it. Because in any way that you want to get it, you need content. And I'm really more leaning on the side of saying for AU Core, we want to be providing a link to something that exists.
Right.
I was actually going to agree that I don't know if it's necessary if you just have a URL, um, because you can certainly retrieve it without providing that content type definition. Um, the other,
I
yeah,
guess the
go ahead.
question I've got is even how do you know whether you can handle it or even potentially download it? Um, and
Yeah.
even if you download it, you still may struggle to actually determine what it actually is.
Yeah, but like you're just relying on accept types then and how the web works. You ask for something, you're
Mm.
provided something. Yeah. I mean, it's choice though. I, I kind of think I would like to know. But there may be actually different formats available to you. So you just define your accept type when you make the call and you'll accept different formats.
Yeah.
So it goes off into another system way of managing that. Yep.
I mean, certainly my
Yeah.
experience with implementing this for things like attachments, where you've in your app, you've just got this generic, upload a document fit function,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
as part of that, you actually really have no idea what it is. You may be able to derive it based on perhaps an extension of the file, but that's
Yeah.
that's a bit of a guess. Um,
Yeah. But
but we've
say it's a
always
reference. Yeah. Say it's a reference to a file resource and you can supply it as XML or JSON. And I don't want to identify what it
Mhm.
does because I can do both. So you just ask what you want.
Yeah, that's a good example actually, because you can't say it's just fire, can you? You have to say
No.
it's fire XML or fire JSON.
Yeah, and in fact, both are available from that same
Mm,
URL location or a HTML render optionally as well, right? So yeah, I get the point of, I think if there's a binary at the end of it and you know what format's in, that's fine. But if it's a web resource, I kind of think it's
But
harder.
again,
Yeah. Yeah.
just reducing it to 0 to 1 with the must support,
Yeah.
provide one if you
Yeah.
know it.
That's
If you don't
fine.
have one, then you're not
Yeah.
having to
I think that's good.
go over the top and have to put in a DAR extension,
Yeah, yeah.
which will be challenging.
And I was just going to go back to the like. I don't think we should be limiting the MIME types as such, but I can certainly see maybe additional bindings with value sets of agreed subsets, because I think really in reality, a lot of the document sharing lives with certain types of document that are able to be shared. Um, this has been a big problem even in the V2 specs about not knowing if you don't restrict the allowed content types in some places, it basically makes it impossible to implement because not everyone can handle every MIME type. So for actually practical solution, it's almost like saying, I want to define some subsets and you can opt into kind of using those, I think at some point, but I don't think we need to do that on day one. But I think practically implementable spec wise, it might be a good idea.
So after that discussion, where do we want to land with content type? Must mandatory or optional? Can I perhaps get a bit of a hands up for those that think it should be mandatory? Okay, so I've got 3 hands up at the moment. 4, 5. Okay, some slow starters.
Looks like
But we,
7 overall to me.
yeah, so that looks like it's going to be okay. All those that think it should be optional. You can put your hand down, Nari, unless you're voting both ways. Okay, so a couple. Okay, so 7-2. There's a lot more people on the call, but that's the way it's feeling at the moment. In that case, I'll leave it as mandatory and so take and we'll leave it to ballot to see if there's strong opinions.
Or like earlier than that, a work group meeting
Yeah.
where we vote. Because this
Great.
is an information session.
Yeah.
So, we
Yeah,
still
good
have to do
point.
that bit.
Okay, so the next two I would sort of do is I already walked through a little bit, but basically these are both optional because they're really conditional. You got to have one or the other, and there is an actual invariant that I haven't exposed here that suggests that you need to have one or the other. And all the um, prof existing, or the two IGs, US Core and IPA, have basically just marked them both as must support. The IHE one on the right is a very specific use case around supporting something called cross-document storage, cross-document. Yeah, I think the S was something like that. Um, and it's XDS in for those that know, and it's about trying to always have a link to it and not have data actually encoded within the resource itself. So again, I feel that we just need to keep that open. This is a core that needs to cover as many use cases as possible, downstream implementations. So we don't know what those use cases are. So I think we need to keep our options open. Is there any strong opinions otherwise on that one?
Heath, I'd just say that e-requesting is using data um, for
Hmm.
its clinical context document reference. So it's not referencing something else. It has the data, the clinical notes
Okay,
embedded inside the document reference.
so it's a very strong reason why to include it.
Yep.
Okay, and the final one then is creation. So I've really just put this here as a reference to say IHE have actually used this, and I'll come back to it later on. But at this point in time, I'm suggesting that creation, the date that of the attachment um, was created, is not a must support element at this point. So unless there's further comments on that group, I'll move on to format. So I probably need to go to the spec to actually give you a decent definition of this one. So format is the rules for the content of the document. And some examples of the types of documents that you can include are here. So, and there's a number of documents you can see. There's lots of IHE codes in here. There's also some HL7 ones, which are referring to different versions of CDA documents. CCDA are American standards for clinical documents, and they've got different ones here. I don't know if the agency has sort of thought about having a set of format codes that would align with our various levels of structured things like our event summary documents that have got different levels. But anyway, that's the kind of idea that we're talking about here. So probably more are related to our structured documents, CDAs and FIRE documents, but you can see most of these in this value set that I'm showing are CDA-like ones. There is radiology text here as an example, something that's a bit more plain text, just to at least tell you that it's a radiology report. Any questions on... Yes, there is, Danielle.
So, how does this cross over into the discussion that we've been having in patient summary around describing the rules of generation for a jurisdictional patient summary? Because the definition of that element sounds like really crossover to me.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have answers for that.
If it does at all, I would prefer then we don't touch it.
I will come back to it perhaps later when I compare it with composition. Um, but it's an interesting, I guess, position that you just summarized at the end there that, you know, perhaps we don't touch it yet
Danielle,
until we better know.
I had exactly the same thought as soon as I looked at
Yeah,
it.
it's a yet because we're still forming the position on how
Mm,
do we describe um, the rules under which a patient summary is generated, and if the definition of that element seems like it really overlaps with that, I think they have to be done together.
Brett, do you have a rebuttal or an agreement?
I have another take on the same position. We should look at R6 as well because they've got URL based profiling, referencing, and things like that as well,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of heading towards this where we're looking at even actor references, for the how was this content created, which
Hmm.
is this kind of the functional stuff, right? Yeah, so I think that's a broader discussion. And I think in R4, I think this is actually inadequate because you can have more than one apply at once.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a problem. Yeah, I think
I,
that this is a harder, harder one.
yeah. I was going to touch on this when we get to value sets, but I guess if we don't even agree that it's must support, then there's no point in having that conversation around value sets. So
I just
I,
don't think that we can come to a robust solution that will like work into the future around this element. Um, and I think we're having the discussions, but I think it's way too early to just slap a must support on it.
any other views? If we didn't say it's must support, would anyone object? Okay.
I think it does create an inability to know exactly what you're going to get right when you access that information. So I think
I'm
it
gonna
does have,
rebut. We don't know now. It doesn't
yeah, yeah,
create
yeah.
the inability. I
Yeah,
agree the
yeah.
inability is there.
There are certain
I'm
things,
just
but there's
not
certain things, right?
convinced
Yeah,
that
I
putting
think
must
like
support.
I think some
Sorry.
things, yeah, I think some things just like the content type, the MIME types are fine because you know what they are and you know you'll be able to read them and show them, right? But if you've got a structured thing on the end, you'll have no idea
No, but we
how
have
to deal with it.
documentreference.code, which says what type of document this is. This is not going, is it a patient summary? That's already handled by something else. So I guess
Yeah,
I'm
but I don't know
rebutting
what
that this
version.
creates
I
an
don't know what version it is or
inability.
what rules you applied. So
Or whether it's a
yeah, like the
CDA or whether it's a
yeah,
fire. We don't even
yeah,
know that.
But isn't that
yeah.
content type, which does the MIME type?
No, that's just underlying exchangeable formats. So that's MIME types don't cover the semantics of the thing. So
You could probably at least know that it's XML CDA
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and fire,
yeah,
JSON fire, although you
yeah.
were saying that we wouldn't want to do that either. But
No, that's not what I'm
Oh,
saying.
no, I was talking about
yeah.
Brett. He was saying he
Uh,
didn't want content type because of didn't
No,
want to
no,
be
no.
told that it's a particular version of fire.
Yeah, yeah. That's a different problem. Like if
Yeah,
you've got multiple things, but like yeah, like I have no problem with the MIME type telling me exactly what's there. But still, I don't know if I'm going to be able to interpret that fire. Is the problem, right? So it's I think we need to work through it in some ways, right?
so I guess what I'm saying to you is I agree, but I think this one we've already recognized. This is big. This is a
yeah,
huge topic and is being
Yeah,
discussed at international. Putting my
sure.
support on it and just walking away is not a good solution.
yeah.
No,
Uh,
no, yeah. I don't know how to populate it if it was not support, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, I think
another.
I agree with you
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
And based on our principles for inclusion in AU Core, which I didn't put up in this particular session, but we will on working group meeting day, being able to get agreement within our timeframes is going to be challenging. I agree. Around the value set, that is. Okay, then I'll strike that out as not must support. Okay, so context is the next group of elements. And this is in particular looking to carry things like a relationship back to the encounter um, and a period. So the references in Fire is actually including the idea of an episode of care. Um, but if we look at the other IGs here, the IPA is allowing both encounters and episodes of care. Um, Similar with document reference, but US core has constrained it back to just an encounter. In all cases, it is optional and must support. Period is the second element, which is obviously well, maybe it's not so obvious, but it is the period of the encounter. So that's relating to the document. So it's the clinical um, date associated with it. So I'll just go back, make sure, or I'm not misrepresenting it. It's the time of service that that is being documented. So as I said, it's the clinically relevant date associated with this document. In all cases, that's been marked as must support and is optional. Um, I'll get rid of
Don't,
those that was in the
don't
way.
don't we have those periods for episodes of care for specific pharmaceutical functions? Like I know in Queensland we have like a 6 month deadline, I think, for episodes of care to stay open and associated scripting in response to that.
So you're
So
talking
it's a
about an
period. It's a
open
period.
period? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So I was just wondering, is the episode of care, is it between date to date, or is it in a time length in terms of number of days or months?
well, the concept of encounter of episode of care is actually a collection of encounters and
Yeah,
everything which then has some context. to be honest, I don't know too much about it. Off the top of my head, in episode of Care, I have some experience with it, but basically you attach a whole heap of encounters to it. You also have basically care teams associated with it. You have conditions associated with it, blah, blah, blah. So there's lots of stuff associated with it. We don't have an AU core profile for it yet. So
Yeah.
I guess at this point, to keep things relatively simple, we're constraining it out. US Core have done the same thing. Um, Not to say that we couldn't bring it back in at a later date, when we've perhaps had a chance to better understand how to use episode of care within Australia. But at the moment, I think we're too immature to be able to do that.
That's cool. It's just clarifying because we do have that legal constraint around when we have recurring um, pharmaceutical scripts
Yeah.
and them having to be within a period of time. So I was wondering
But you could
what the
use the
period.
period there. You could actually use the
Yeah,
date there and have an open date for that
yeah,
period without necessarily using episode of care.
yeah. Cool. All right.
Danielle?
Now, I'm gonna talk a little bit broader around episodic care and why I actually think we should keep it in AU Core. Um, One of I think what would be our primary uses of this is it's a way to describe a care relationship. So we would use episode of care if we model care team to say this is like the period of time in which this patient is associated with that, or like a registered GP. Episode of care is also used for like the National Cancer Registry to do those sorts of things. So I'm quite hesitant of leaving it out of document reference because I think even if we don't do it immediately, we're going to be doing it really, really soon with around like care planning, care teams, that kind of thing. That's what we use it for.
Okay. Um, right.
I was actually going to agree. I'm not sure we should be constraining it away. Um, Mainly because I do think it's going to come in at some stage. Especially like condition, like disease management, on like that kind of stuff where things are ongoing and maybe till the end of your life, right? So it's kind of like I think there's like a grouper you want to have around some of that.
So I guess my response to that is, are we putting too much not that we've got to obligations yet, but when we do, and we're talking about a requester having to um, know error if it received a episode of care, are we putting too much of an obligation on systems to comply with that?
Still just fire, right? You just can ignore it.
Producer no. Oh, sorry, hang on. This is core. So responder no, requester yes. That's the question. Um, well, I mean, they have to know error, which isn't hard from an AU core perspective. I think maybe you're more concerned about the flow on to all downstream specifications
Yes and
where
no.
this is in play.
Yes and no. So
Okay.
I I acknowledge that no error is pretty low bar, but still,
I mean, it doesn't mean I can't reject it because that's also part of it.
mm,
A system can be, I do only accept encounter info here.
yep.
And you send me episode of care, and I send you back something that says, I will not accept this. I need encounter information, please, not episode of care. That's valid.
Mm,
That's totally conformant.
mhm. Okay. Any
Yeah.
objections to including episode of care? I'm not hearing any. Any objections to both of these being must support, or all three really? Context at the main, which if any of the other two are must support, then we really need to be must support at the context level. Don't have to, but would make more sense. So any of these, Brett?
Got it. Yeah, I've got another problem, which this is bringing that to a head, I think, too, is like you can have multiple contexts, right? It can be an encounter and an episode of care context. So is the R4 definition zero? Oh, okay, the encounter's repeating because that's
Yeah,
changed. Yeah.
I have suggested it to be limited to one, mainly
Yeah,
based on the fact that IPA and US Core are doing that.
is that though what the oh, okay, for the encounter.
Okay, I'll put it another question.
Yeah, because I think that's actually problematic in structure in R4.
Do we say nothing about encounter and just include context period? And I guess why I'm bullish
Mm.
about encounter period because later we will see it in search criteria, right? So from my
Yeah,
perspective, it's important for search, but I don't feel that it's overly important at this point in time to have a context encounter.
I'm just looking what's happening in R6, right? Because like they've gone to repeating context of appointment, encounter, or episode of care.
Yeah, they've changed things significantly.
Yeah, and I think we need to think about it.
It's out at the root level as well, both of them. There's not
Yeah,
even a context element.
Yeah, period. Yeah, that's at the root.
Both of them are.
Yeah, period becomes its own thing. So I kind of thinking maybe you're right. Maybe we just want to know the period of its relevant, like event relevancy kind of stuff.
I would advocate doing that in a U call. We want to be conservative. This is the minimum requirements and it goes across every use case. So, context period, I think everybody sounds okay with that. Uh, yeah. Like the least must support items is the best set of must support items.
Well, especially if we've got some discussion around episode of care and as you say, R6 changes the structure and all sorts of stuff. So
It doesn't stop you doing it, right? If you want
no.
to reference, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the important thing. The only thing I'm thinking is encounter linkage might be helpful, right? Which is kind of for some other projects.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that, I think.
Yeah. So I might
So is period by itself does that make sense to people? I think like just knowing because it's defined as time of service that is being documented in R6. The time period over which the service that is described by the document was provided. That makes sense, I think.
okay, so Minty time, based on what you've seen thus far, get out of the way. Are there any other document elements that shall be must support in AE core? And if you just do the thumbs up if you don't want to vote, if there's nothing, all right, to vote on. Unfortunately, with these open questions, there's no way to say I'm good. Or just maybe type in no. Let's see. Let's see lots of
What do
no's
we have?
or
We've got identifier and status, type and category. The first three have been totally
subject,
non-controversial. Subject, yep, definitely. Date,
date,
author. Then we're coming into what we're talking about today,
content.
which is around content, attachment. We just did talk about a couple of those ones to take out. Okay. So it's all right. What else do we need to form minimum requirements?
Yeah. So I think the only one to take out here is encounter.
Hmm.
I think we might have made content type optional. No, we didn't. We left it. We left it at 1 to 1. Or did we make it optional? I have to go back to the recording on that.
I have to admit, there are no other elements that I think cross all the the requirements for inclusion for AU Core. There's a bunch of stuff that would be included in different kind of workflows and specs, but I'm not seeing anything that I would add for this profile goes across everything. Oh, doc status?
Yeah,
Maybe.
that was one I was thinking that, I mean, that might be useful, but I don't know if we,
We can come back to it later, but it's the only one that I think that we've been talking about with composition that would at all cross the kind of use
yeah,
cases we've been
I think
saying.
that, see, that might be handy if you are referencing a PDF, right? And you
Mm.
don't know. It's written in the PDF, whether it's the final pathology report or the interim, right?
So
I
I
did.
mean, I'd be happy
Yeah,
to approve something without doc status,
yeah,
but just answering the question of is there anything else? Maybe doc status is my only thought.
And
yeah,
my rationale for that being a candidate for sure is this is my quick mapping, and we're at time. That's
yeah,
why didn't go through this slide. But there is a mapping from composition status to doc status.
yeah,
So the current
yeah,
status actually is very meaningless. It's more about versioning and revisions, whereas the actual status of the document. But then, how helpful are those values? Most of them are going to be final by the time we get to
yeah,
actually exchanging it anyway. The only other possible one might be amended. Um, but again, then that starts getting correlated with
yeah,
status and stuff like that. So
into document management. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of agree.
the,
You're gonna, and like if you're actually resolving a composition, you can find out the answer. Um, and if you're resolving something else, I assume it says it in the content.
I mean, seeing that it came up, I'm just going to point this one out.
Yeah,
It, a tester party in composition, it maps to authenticator. So that's the one I think that might be relevant. Actually, and another
do
one is
you?
custodian. So it's those two I'm more worried about than any of the others.
But do you have to do that on the reference? That because you can get the composition right. I mean, it's useful metadata, but
Well, well, if
yeah,
we're
yeah,
doing search criteria on
yeah,
document reference, then we need the data in the document reference.
sure.
Would you search by a tester?
No.
Would you
No,
search by custodian?
yeah,
More
Oh,
maybe,
likely.
maybe.
yeah, more
Mm,
likely, yeah,
A tester? Never.
mm.
Custodian? It's a conversation we could have. I don't think it's minimum requirement, but maybe.
What
All
about
right,
an
I've got to
audit?
go. Thank you very much, Heath.
yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got
Thank
somewhere.
you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, cheers.
Bye.